On October 11, 2015, 18-year-old Zoe Hastings was getting ready for an evening youth meeting at her church. That Sunday, she planned to arrive early to help with preparations. Around 4:40 p.m., she left home in her white Honda Odyssey. After that, there's nothing. No more texts, no more calls. She never arrived at church. Her phone stopped answering. When the evening service ended and Zoe still hadn't shown up, her parents began calling friends. No one had seen her. By 9 p.m., they contacted police to report her missing. Her first stop was supposed to be quick. A Walgreens at the intersection of Garland Road and Peavy Road, where she needed to return a DVD to a Redbox kiosk. Police later reviewed surveillance footage showing her arriving in her white Honda Odyssey, getting out of the vehicle, and returning the DVD. The video was never released to the public, but according to authorities, it showed that when Zoe returned to her van, a man approached her. He stopped her from closing the door, told her to move to the passenger seat, and then got behind the wheel himself. A few seconds later, the van pulled away, but not toward the church. It was an abduction. By 5 p.m., Zoe's phone activity stopped completely. No calls, no messages, no GPS signal. When she didn't arrive at church, people assumed she might have been delayed. But by early evening, worry began to grow. By 9 p.m., her parents reported her missing. Officers canvassed the Walgreens lot that night, searching for any sign of struggle, but found nothing obvious. No broken glass, no dropped belongings. The only clue they had was the video and the eyewitness descriptions. The descriptions were consistent. A black male, late 20s to mid-30s, medium height, short beard or stubble, Afro-style hair. Police would later confirm that those accounts aligned with what the security footage suggested. Through the night, volunteers and family members searched the streets near White Rock Lake. They posted flyers, called hospitals, drove every route she might have taken. But Zoe's van, and Zoe herself, were gone. Then, at 8 a.m. the next morning, everything changed. A man walking his dog along Dixon Branch Creek, less than 2 miles from the Walgreens, spotted a white van crashed against a concrete culvert at the bottom of a ravine. When police arrived, they confirmed it was Zoe's Honda Odyssey. The front end of the van was damaged, but investigators immediately knew it wasn't a normal accident. There were no skid marks, no attempt to brake. The van looked as if it had simply been rolled down into the creek. A few feet away, in the shallow water, officers found Zoe's body. It was clear she had been the victim of violence. The area was quickly sealed off with yellow tape. Detectives, crime scene technicians, and reporters gathered along the embankment. What had begun as a missing person search had now become a homicide investigation. Before that October evening, Zoe Hastings lived what most would call a peaceful, purpose-filled life. 18 years old, the oldest of 5 children, she had just graduated from Booker T. Washington High School for the Performing and Visual Arts, one of Dallas's most respected magnet schools. Zoe wasn't the type to seek attention. She preferred to listen rather than talk, to create rather than compete. Friends remembered her as the calm one, the kind of person who made you feel steadier just by being near her. Faith was an essential part of who she was. Zoe was an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where she volunteered regularly. She helped with youth programs, art activities for children, and community service events. Her family said she often left short Bible verses written on sticky notes around the house, reminders to stay kind, patient, and grounded. Her plans were simple, but full of hope. She wanted to go to college, continue her art, and stay involved in service work through her church. Those who knew her said she was deeply kind, but also careful, thoughtful. She didn't take unnecessary risks. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Zoe spent time with her family, helped her younger siblings with homework, and met friends for coffee. On Saturday night, she watched a movie with her brothers, the same DVD she returned to Redbox the next day. Nothing in her life hinted at danger, no enemies, no romantic drama, no reason to fear for her safety. When neighbors were later interviewed by reporters, almost everyone began their sentence the same way. She was just good, always smiling, always helping. It's that purity, that sense of peace, that made what happened next so impossible to understand. When officers arrived at the scene on the morning of October 12, 2015, they quickly realized this was no ordinary accident. The white Honda Odyssey, belonging to Zoe Hastings, sat angled in the creek bed off Dixon Branch, its front bumper damaged. The van's position, pressed against the culvert with no skid marks nearby, told investigators that the vehicle hadn't crashed by mistake. Inside, officers found Zoe's personal belongings, her purse, phone charger, and other items that made it clear nothing had been stolen. Her body was found a few feet away from the driver's side door in shallow water. From the start, the case was treated as a homicide. Crime scene technicians combed through the van for trace evidence, fingerprints, fibers, and biological material. What they found would become the investigation's first major lead. On the driver's side door handle, technicians collected a sample containing male DNA. The sample was strong enough to run through the National CODIS database, a system that matches DNA profiles from known offenders. The sample was shipped to the state lab for testing. Meanwhile, detectives began reconstructing Zoe's final hours. The Walgreens surveillance footage gave them a timeline. 4:42 p.m., Zoe returning her DVD. The man approaching her. The van leaving the parking lot. From there, they canvassed surrounding businesses and homes, collecting every available security recording from that afternoon. A few witnesses came forward. One said he saw a man talking to a young woman near a white van outside Walgreens that evening. Another described the same man asking him for a ride. The suspect's description was consistent: a black male, medium height, large Afro-style hair, and dark clothing. In a press briefing later that day, a Dallas police spokesperson confirmed that the death was being investigated as a homicide and that detectives were working around the clock to identify the man seen near Zoe. They also emphasized that there was no sign of robbery and no evidence that Zoe knew her attacker. As the city learned of her death, the community's reaction was immediate. Church members organized prayer vigils, friends flooded social media with photos of Zoe, and strangers left flowers outside the Walgreens. Reporters described the crime as random, shocking, and cruel. People wanted answers, and the police were determined to find them. 10 days later, those answers would begin to emerge. The DNA sample from the van's door handle came back from the lab. It was a match to a man already in the system. A man named Antonio Lamar Cochran, age 34. Cochran had a criminal history. He'd been arrested several times: burglary, assault, theft, but nothing that had kept him in prison long term. His record included at least one prior accusation involving a woman, though that case had been dropped for lack of evidence. When detectives ran his address, they found he lived in South Dallas, not far from where Zoe's van was discovered. Samples taken from the van's driver's side door handle and from a folding knife found near the creek both matched Cochran's DNA profile. Investigators also collected evidence from Zoe's body. Tests showed traces of male DNA, and prosecutors later alleged that Zoe had been sexually assaulted before her death. However, forensic experts stated that the results of these studies were inconclusive. There was no physical trauma proving rape beyond doubt, and the genetic material yielded only a partial YSTR profile, which could not confirm how or when the contact occurred. Even without that certainty, the combination of DNA evidence, cell records, and surveillance footage gave detectives enough to charge him. On October 22, 2015, officers surrounded Cochran's apartment and arrested him without incident. He said he didn't know Zoe Hastings, didn't drive a van, and had never been near Walgreens that day. But the DNA didn't lie, and when investigators searched his home, they found clothing that matched what witnesses had described: dark pants, a jacket, and shoes that appeared recently cleaned. At a press conference later that day, Dallas Police Major Max Giron announced the arrest. "We believe this was a random act of violence. There's no indication the victim knew the suspect." Those words, "random act of violence," hit the community hard. It meant anyone could have been in Zoe's place. The Hastings family released a short statement thanking police and the public for their support. They didn't speak of anger, only of loss. Meanwhile, prosecutors charged Cochran with capital murder, citing evidence of both sexual assault and kidnapping. Under Texas law, that made him eligible for the death penalty. For the Hastings family, the news brought mixed emotions. There was relief. Someone had finally been charged. But there was also fear of what a long trial might bring. The trial was scheduled for early 2018. Almost 3 years after Zoe Hastings was killed, the case against Antonio Lamar Cochran finally went to trial in Dallas County. It was February 2018. For Zoe's family, the wait had been long. Years of hearings, delays, and quiet frustration. At the defense table, Cochran kept his head down as the charge was read: capital murder. Prosecutors said he had kidnapped and killed Zoe Hastings, and that she may have been sexually assaulted before her death. Jurors heard from detectives, DNA experts, and witnesses. 2 DNA samples, one from the van's driver's side door handle, another from a knife found near the creek, both matched Cochran. A third, partial YSTR DNA profile from a sexual assault kit was also introduced. Experts said it could belong to Cochran, but wasn't conclusive proof of sexual assault. Cell phone records placed him near the Walgreens the night Zoe disappeared, and later near where the van was found. A witness testified that a man matching Cochran's description approached him that night, asking for a ride, just minutes before Zoe arrived. Piece by piece, the prosecution tied the evidence together. Witness Lester Clark says he saw Zoe Hastings getting in her van and saw a man abruptly approach and put his hand in the door to stop it from closing. They were talking. Cochran's attorneys didn't deny the DNA match. They argued it didn't prove when or how contact happened. They said the DNA could have transferred by touch or through the environment. They reminded the jury there were no direct witnesses to the killing, and the sexual assault evidence wasn't solid. They also focused on his mental capacity. A psychologist testified that Cochran's IQ was in the 70s, on the edge of mild intellectual disability. The defense said that meant he couldn't fully plan or understand what he was doing. This meant that he could not face the death penalty because he was intellectually disabled. The state pushed back. He turned off his phone. He changed his routine. He ran, the prosecutor said. That's not confusion. That's control. Through all of it, Zoe's parents sat together quietly. When the surveillance footage played, her mother looked away. Her father stayed still, hands folded. Near the end of the trial, the DNA analyst confirmed that all testing had been verified by independent labs. There was no question the DNA from the van and the knife belonged to Cochran. But the expert also said the YSTR result couldn't prove a sexual assault had occurred. That uncertainty became the center of the case. When closing arguments ended, the jury had to decide: did the state prove that Zoe's death happened during another crime, kidnapping or sexual assault, which would make it capital murder? Or was it murder, without those additional elements? The answer would decide how long Antonio Cochran would spend behind bars, and whether he would ever have a chance at freedom again. The jury deliberated for 4 days. When they returned, the room went quiet. The clerk read the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Antonio Lamar Cochran, guilty of murder in the death of Zoe Hastings." The decision meant the jury had declined to convict on capital murder, the higher charge that would have carried an automatic life sentence without parole. Under Texas law, a conviction for murder carries a sentence of life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years, plus a $10,000 fine. That's the sentence the jury imposed. When the judge read it aloud, Cochran showed no emotion. The judge said, "You took the life of a young woman who was helping someone. You will spend the rest of your life knowing that truth." The verdict brought mixed feelings. Zoe's parents had hoped for a capital murder conviction, for a verdict that would mean no chance of parole. Detectives and prosecutors said later they respected the jury's verdict, even if it wasn't what they had sought. For the Hastings family, justice came with limits, but at least it came.